a place of faith and hope, but also, and equally important, a place of education. For all of you who come through these doors, for our members and our beloved Oyster Bay community, we are so proud to call this our home. Any and all of our events, and those we partner with Theodore's, are open to the public and our entire community. We have had many special events here this past year, and if events like tonight or concerts or films interest you, please add your name to our email list so you can see what's going on. Tonight's conversation speaks to both the ideals of faith and hope. Faith being defined as having the courage to believe and hope when there's no reason to. And education being defined as a verb, as I quote, an enlightening experience. Tonight, the stories you will hear should give you faith and hope and show through example of others there is always reason to believe and have faith. This is particularly important as we find ourselves living through such challenging times. Finally, tonight should educate you. You may agree, you may disagree with some of what you hear, but tonight, I can say without equivocation, you will know more when you leave than when you walked in. And if that is all we have done tonight, then we have done our job. Before I conclude, I'd like to make a special thank you to all of you who are joining us tonight at home, and most importantly, Becky from Theodore's and Lee from our temple, and our beloved Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz, who's studying abroad in Israel and sends his regrets. Thank you all for putting in the work to make this all possible tonight. Now let me get down to the business at hand and introduce tonight's guests. First, I would like to welcome New York State Assemblyman Charles Lavin, who was very happy to join us tonight. I'm also pleased to invite Long Island NAACP President Tracy Edwards to join me on the bima to formally introduce our speakers this evening. There will be time tonight for questions and comments at the end of the event, so please refrain from questions till the conclusion of the conversation, at which time we will there will be a microphone in the middle for you to ask your questions. At the conclusion of the conversation, the book signing will take place in the social hall in the adjacent room. Please form an orderly line and be patient, as the congressman looks forward to having a moment with each and every one of you. Enjoy the journey of Steve Israel in conversation with Congressman Jamie Raskin, discussing his book entitled Unthinkable: Trials, Truth, and the Trials of the American Democracy. Tracy?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you. This is a beautiful, beautiful temple, and I'm so happy to be here. Well, good evening, everyone. So my name is Tracy Edwards, and I am the Long Island Regional Director for the NAACP New York State Conference under Hazel Dukes, our state president, who sends her best wishes to all of you. Congressman Raskin, I know you can hear me. Welcome to Long Island. Well, most of us know Congressman Israel very well. But I wanted to give you a sense of who he is on a personal level to me. I first met Congressman Israel when I was one of his constituents. There was a housing and zoning issue in our neighborhood when speculators were coming into our neighborhood and splitting up our required acre zoning. I was drafted to be the spokesperson for the neighborhood. And after meeting then town councilman Steve Israel over time, he said, you know, you ask a lot of questions and you are very thorough. So the next thing you know, I was on the planning board and it started my career in public service. He invested his time, his knowledge in me over the years, how to be prepared, how to focus on constituents as your main purpose, and everything else will follow. He sees things in you that you don't see in yourself. And once you work for Steve Israel, you always work either with him or for him. I call him my forever boss. And he has this great sense of humor. If you read his bio, you will see that he left Capitol Hill after 16 years, unindicted, and unindicted and undefeated. When President Clinton called him one of the most thoughtful members of Congress, our Steve Israel said, well, that's not really saying too much. We are so blessed that in 2021, he and his lovely wife, Kara, opened this small, unique bookstore, Theodore's Books, in this wonderful, historic Oyster Bay, fulfilling one of his lifelong dreams. But as you know, he also directs the Nonpartisan Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Brooks School of Public Policy for Cornell University. He also is a family person. He has 2 daughters and 2 wonderful grandchildren. But when I read Congressman Raskin's bio, he had a similar background. Like Congressman Israel, Congressman Raskin started his career locally. He was a 3-term state senator in Maryland, where he also served as the Senate Majority Whip. He earned a reputation for building coalitions and delivering landmark legislative accomplishments. He's also a professor of constitutional law at Americans University, Washington College of Law for more than 25 years. He's authored several books. I know all of you are waiting for one of the books that you have purchased tonight, Unthinkable. I cannot wait to read it. But prior to that, he also authored the Washington Post bestseller, Overruling Democracy, The Supreme Court versus the American People, and We the Students, Supreme Court Cases for and about America's Students, which has sold more than 50,000 copies. Congressman Raskin proudly represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District. The district includes Montgomery, Carroll, Frederick counties. He was sworn into his 3rd term at the start of the 117th Congress. I know that he probably is second-guessing himself right now. He's on the House Judiciary Committee, the Committee on Oversight and Reform, the Committee on House Administration. It's his 2nd term on the Rules Committee, the Coronavirus Select Committee, and he is also renamed chair of the Oversight Committee. And of course, we are all watching him now on I call it the Insurrection Committee. He is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. So Congressman Raskin, I will tell you that part of my job at the NAACP is always to look up people before I either introduce them or talk to them, because the NAACP has a legislative scorecard which shows all of our branches, the actions, not just the words, of our elected officials. So when I'm going to be with an elected official, I look up their scorecard to see how happy I'm going to be when I meet them and how nice I'm going to be to them when I interact with them. So let me tell you about Congressman Raskin. This is the scorecard. He not only got an A on the NAACP scorecard, he had 100%. Which means that out of the 32 legislative actions that we put before Congressman Raskin, he voted for all of them. I am proud to represent the NAACP this evening and on the stage to introduce both of you at this critical time in our country. We need people like both of you who are powerful, courageous, thoughtful. And Congressman Raskin, he and his family have pushed through some painful experiences, and he has stayed strong to work on behalf of our country. And sir, we are forever grateful. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to give you Congressman Jamie Raskin and my friend and mentor, Steve Israel.
Thank you. Thank you,
Well, I think we can stop right there, don't you? Tracy, how about a big hand for Tracy Edwards for everything that she does? And Brian, where's Brian Lamb? Thank you, Brian. Thank you for everything that this congregation has done. We're very grateful to you. And how about another big hand for Jamie Raskin? I was telling Jamie that this is a very historic place, Oyster Bay. History has been made here in this neighborhood. This is where George Washington's spy network had its headquarters, right, Assemblyman Levine? Right here, Raynham Hall. This is where Theodore Roosevelt lived, raised his family, worked, had his summer executive offices for the White House when he was president, took the train from New York to Oyster Bay, and then got on a horse and went up to Sagamore Hill and went in the opposite direction when he had to be in Washington. Now, none of us had the opportunity to meet those makers of history, George Washington, Townsend, Theodore Roosevelt, but tonight you get to meet a maker of history in Jamie Raskin. That's pretty cool. Jamie, I want to get right to the book. And what we're going to do, Jamie and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation. Is it Congressman or Mr. Chairman or Jamie? What do you prefer this evening?
All of those in succession would be best. Just call me Jamie.
I was telling my wife, Kara, last night that I do not remember reading a nonfiction book and blinking back tears as frequently as I did with this book. But not tears of despair, sometimes tears of despair, but also tears of fundamental hope that this country is going to be okay as long as we have people like Jamie Raskin in Washington, D.C. It's a soulful book. It is a soulful book. And so I want to begin at the beginning, Jamie, with your permission. I want to read a brief passage at the beginning and then ask you to reflect on this. You write, "The week between December 31st, 2020 and January 6, 2021, my family suffered two impossible traumas. The shattering death by suicide of my beloved 25-year-old son, Tommy, and the violent mob insurrection at the U.S. Capitol that left several people dead, more than 140 Capitol and Metropolitan police officers wounded and injured, hundreds of people, including several in our family, fleeing for their lives, and the nation shaken to its core." And shortly after those traumas, Nancy Pelosi calls you and asks you to be the manager of the second impeachment of Donald Trump. And you write, "It was the hardest thing I've ever been asked to do professionally at the most difficult time I've ever experienced personally. But the assignment became paradoxically a salvation and sustenance, a pathway back to the land of the living, and a fountain of hope that renewed and strengthened my faith in democracy. Help us understand how you found that pathway through unimaginable darkness.
Steve, let me first thank you for inviting me here, and Tracy, thank you for those lovely words, and I see my friend Jackie Gordon here, and I want to thank the wonderful people of Oyster Bay and Long Island for receiving me here. It's my first time ever to Long Island, and so it's a nice... I just have images from The Great Gatsby of what's going on here. So it's nice to meet you guys. And, well, you know, when Nancy called me, you know, I wasn't eating and I wasn't sleeping, and you know, I was in a very dark place, somewhere I'd never been before, after we lost Tommy on the last day of 2020. I was absolutely dumbfounded, you know, when she called to ask me to do that. And, well, I mean, you know, on Capitol Hill, I mean, people that generally are looking for opportunities like that. In hindsight, I can see, you know, that lots of people wanted to do it. I mean, who would not want to lead the impeachment of Donald Trump, you know? But I, you know, I was in a very different place, and I was just kind of shell-shocked and dumbfounded and not expecting it or thinking about it or anything. And but the minute she said it, I sort of knew that it was something that I had to do. And I record in the book how I felt progressively like she had thrown me a lifeline, because I didn't know whether I'd be able to do anything of meaning or substance again in my career after we lost Tommy. And you know, she was basically saying, we need you. Mm-hmm. So, you know, for that, I will be forever grateful to my friend Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah. You give us the gift of Tommy in this book. And you introduce us to him. Can we talk about him for a moment or so?
By all means.
Okay. There's a wonderful story you tell that I never met Tommy, obviously. And in fact, so people know, Jamie and I didn't serve together. I left in 2017, and he was sworn in 2017. So we never had the privilege of serving together. So like you...
We never met. And I feel like I know you because people talk about you all the time in Washington. I don't have to actually display the scars on my back that some of them left, by the way. But we didn't know each other, other than I think I saw you in the members' dining room once very early on and waved to you and you waved back. And so I know Jamie the way you know Jamie, watching him and viewing him and reading about him. And now that I've read this book, I feel like you're like a best friend. I feel like I've really come to know you, and I've come to know Tommy. There's a wonderful story about Tommy. It's 2006, as I recall. You're running for the state senate. That's my first campaign.
In my very first campaign. And I had empathy pains when I read this. And the political establishment is telling you, no, don't run. That's what they told me, and that's what many told Jackie Gordon. No, you can't beat the machine, they were telling you. And Tommy is with you at an event early on. Do you want to tell that story, or do you want me to?
Well, is this the one about you can't beat the machine? Was that?
You can't beat the machine,
yeah. And I should just set the table for you, because I was running against a 32-year incumbent who was president pro tem of the Maryland Senate, but who had come out for the Iraq War, who was opposing marriage equality, who had introduced legislation to expand the death penalty, and like that's not at all where I am politically. And so I one day just said I'm going to run for office. And my favorite story about the race actually was that the Washington Post had an article quoting a pundit who said Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. And then 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. And they had another article. they had another article quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. So we went from impossible to inevitable in 9 months. I got these two articles lined up, But anyway, but that story, I mean, Tommy was my main supporter and strategist, and he was just a born political genius.
But how old is he in this race?
So he would have been, 10 and 11.
10 and 11.
Yeah. But he was an extraordinary young man. I mean, he was a poet, a real poet, and you can see some of his poetry if you go online, him getting up and delivering it. He had a photographic memory, so he would, write these poems that would go on for 20 or 30 minutes, and he would get up, and it was just spellbinding. And he was a playwright, and he was a second-year student at Harvard Law School when we lost him. But he was a teacher. He was teaching undergrads. But anyway, so we went, and so there was a leading political figure, and we were at this event, and we were talking to him, and I hadn't seen him since I'd announced it, and I said, I really would love to have your support or whatever, and he was very just disdainful, and I said, he said it's a bad idea, and I said, why is it a bad idea? He said, because you can't beat the machine. And so then Tommy said to him, well, who is the machine? And then he named 3 or 4 people, and Tommy said, well, that's 4 people, but there's 175,000 people in my dad's district. And it was a great lesson in one person, one vote democracy. And so, and I like to tell the young people in our democracy summer program today that in politics, nothing is impossible and nothing's inevitable. It's only possible through the democratic arts of reaching people one by one through education and organizing and mobilizing people for change.
So the book deals obviously with Tommy, but not just Tommy, the rest of your family. And not just your family, but other families. And another one of my favorite stories in this book, which, by the way, I texted Speaker Pelosi this morning to tell her that we were going to be together, and I said, here are my 2 favorite stories. She hasn't yet texted back, but I suspect she will, is the story where you are on the floor with Liz Cheney and her daughter. And she, if I may.
Yeah, you better read that one.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll read it.
As I sink deeper into middle age over here.
Yeah, no, I
so
understand. One day, Liz, now remember, Jamie Raskin, Liz Cheney.
Well, we came in the same year.
We came in the same
year, so we were friends.
So one day, Liz called me and left me a message to meet her on the floor, where she introduced me to her daughter, who was in town. Quote, "This is the congressman I was telling you about," she said. "He's the one who wrote the book saying that Grandpa never should have been vice president because the Supreme Court was wrong." But then you write, "I got a kick out of this." Watching you and Liz Cheney, I mean, it has to give us hope that on both sides of the aisle, maybe not in equal scale, but on both sides of the aisle, there are men and women of principle. You probably disagree with her on 95% of the issues, but you have found that 5% where you can work together. Talk about that relationship.
Well, in a sense, it's not really an issue. You can't call the whole constitutional democratic infrastructure an issue. So, what we're agreeing on is essentially who we are as Americans, that we can agree to fight about lots of stuff. I mean, I told Liz I can't wait to going back to disagreeing with her about everything, But right now, I mean, we are in a constitutional emergency, and we are all constitutional first responders who are out there fighting to defend the integrity of this experiment in democratic self-government, because authoritarianism is on a rampage all over the world, and it's on a rampage in America too, and we got to stop it. So. But I'm a middle child. I don't know if we got any middle children out there, but I've always tried to bring people together. That's like my assigned role in life, and so I believe in, I don't even believe in bipartisanship. I believe in nonpartisanship. We talk about bipartisanship. There are tens of millions of people who hate both of our parties. I mean, there are independents, there's libertarians, there's Greens. I mean, we got to reach out to everybody, and we've got to make sure everybody is invested in maintaining the structure. I mean, the only president whose bust I have on my desk is Abraham Lincoln, the founder of the Republican Party. And my party was for a long time the party of the racists in the South, the Dixiecrats, and the parties change, but it's the values and the principles that have got to unify us. And we are not unified in American democracy by virtue of being one race or one religion or one ethnicity or one party or one ideology, but we do have one constitution, and we all have got to be constitutional patriots, which means we've got to believe in the processes and the institutions and the values that bind us through the Constitution.
Now you just... You just talked about a constitutional emergency. You used the word rampage. We have about half an hour and we want to get to some questions that you have. Can you share with us your observations of that rampage on January 6th? Can you take us through the day in as succinct a form as is possible?
I'll try.
Okay.
Well, it was definitely an eerie day. I mean, you could tell this was not a normal day. When my chief of staff, Julie Tagan, picked me up to go down to the Hill, there were, crowds and clusters of people beginning to form, and they were kind of heckling the traffic. And so we were on Constitution Avenue, 3rd Street, I think. I recorded it in the book. And, a group of people basically started yelling at us, saying, we're going to take it all back. And, you all know that Trump won, and, giving us the finger and stuff like that. And I mean, it's bad in Washington, but usually people don't give you the finger on the way to work every day, So...
you should represent New York.
Right. Well, you guys are built for that kind of service. But anyway, my daughters, Hannah and Tabitha, and nieces and nephews, a lot of people in the family were trying to convince me not to go in. And I was like, look, this is January the 6th. It's in the Constitution, in the 12th Amendment. The Wednesday of the first week of January following a presidential election is a day when the Congress meets in joint session. The House and Senate come together to collect Electoral College votes and to count them. I'm sure you got to do some of them through your service. It happens every 4 years, and usually it's a pretty pedestrian affair. I mean, the way it was described to me by Ed Perlmutter, a guy who sits next to me in the Rules Committee, is he said, it takes 15 or 20 minutes, and we take the electors and we announce what everyone knows, which is so-and-so has won the election. Usually it's not the kind of day where you can get killed. He said that it was a day for bipartisan drinking, on the hills, on the bars of Capitol Hill. But anyway, and so I said, I've got to go. I've got to be there. And the speaker had asked me to be prepared to answer anticipated objections to the receipt of Electoral College votes from Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, perhaps Nevada, and New Mexico. So I'd been, researching all these cases. Fortunately, Trump had brought lawsuits alleging corruption in all of these states, and all of the courts came back, more than 60 of the courts came back, rejecting in detail every allegation of electoral corruption. So our homework was pretty easy. It was like, read these cases and get ready to explain what the courts had already decided and explain our function, because January 6th is not a day when the members vote for the person they want to be president. It's the day when we just accept the electors and we're vote counters at that point, and then we say, yes, these are the real votes. So, but there was increasing talk of violence, but really none of us had been thinking that the violence would come inside. And we knew that there were lots of signs of what we have come to describe as a political coup going on, an effort to get Pence to step outside of his constitutional role and unilaterally and lawlessly declare and exercise powers to essentially nullify electoral college votes from these states. And we knew that was going on, but when we got out to the floor at 1 o'clock, we had a letter from Vice President Pence explaining in painstaking detail why he could not do constitutionally what Trump was asking him to do. So we breathed a sigh of relief. We thought that it was over at that point, but what we had not counted on was that Trump's forces had mobilized all of these domestic violent extremist groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the Three Percenters, the militia groups, the QAnon networks, to lead this mob assault on our officers, 150 of whom ended up injured and wounded, to come in and to shut down the proceedings for the first time in American history. It had never happened before, and to put that kind of pressure on Pence. As they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," he had to flee the Capitol. He went running out with, maybe you've seen the pictures of the entourage going out with him, including, you can see the guy carrying the nuclear football with him. Imagine if the Proud Boys had gotten a hold of that guy, right? So they exited. There was an attempt to get him to go in a car to leave the Capitol grounds. And again, much to Vice President Pence's credit, he said, "I'm not getting in that car." He said, "I'm not leaving until we count the Electoral College votes." And that was the position that we all had. We are going to go back in. We will let the dogs come and search for the bombs, but we are going to go back in. And there's an interview that I did on C-SPAN from our hiding place in the Capitol saying all of us are resolved to go back in, which probably wasn't completely true. Certainly all the Democrats were resolved to go back in. Liz Cheney was resolved to go back in, but there were people who wanted there to be a postponement of the proceedings to see what could happen, and that could have, plunged us into anything. I think that Trump's basic thought was get Pence to reject those Electoral College votes, and either he wins in the joint session or there's a declaration that nobody has a majority under the 12th Amendment. At that point, the House meets and votes for president. And you ask, well, why would Trump and his team want the House of Representatives voting to decide the new president? Well, they understood that under the 12th Amendment, we're not voting on the basis of one member, one vote, but rather one state, one vote. That's what the 12th Amendment says. And so the GOP was controlling 27 states. We have 22 states. And Pennsylvania is split down the middle, 9-9. So even had they suffered the defection of the great at-large representative from Wyoming, they still would have had 26 votes, and they would have declared victory. And if he had followed, his disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's advice, he would have declared martial law at that point by invoking the Insurrection Act, and then would have wanted to call in the National Guard to put down the insurrectionary chaos he had unleashed against us. And at that point, anything could have happened. Autocracy, dictatorship, civil war, you name it. We would have entered a very different kind of government in our country.
So it was a self-executing coup, would you say?
Yeah,
or an attempt at a self-executing coup.
The members of our committee described it as a coup, and the reason why is because it was a coup, right? It was a coup is defined as a seizure of power outside of the normal constitutional process, and the political scientists describe something called a self-coup, and a self-coup is where the coup doesn't come from the military against the president, but it comes from the president against the constitutional order, right, because he's disappointed with the outcome of the electoral process. So it was an attempt to overthrow the general constitutional order and what took place in the election. And I will tell you, because I've been researching this real closely, if you look at the history and the operation of fascist political parties and authoritarian parties all over the earth and in history, they have two things in common. One is that they reject the outcome of democratic elections if they don't favor them. And two is they embrace or they accept political violence as a way of doing politics. So we have to be very careful about political parties that reject the outcome of elections and that embrace political violence, because that is outside of the constitutional structure.
Why do you think the National Guard was deployed to the Capitol during the Black Lives Matter protests, but not during this insurrection?
Well, I write about that in the book, and it's something that the committee will have something to say about. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but I'll tell you this. When the family was saying to me, well, Tabitha said to me, when she decided, and my son-in-law, Hank, by the way, this is my future son-in-law here, Ryan. He's marrying Tabitha.
Who's in the book.
So he's in the book. But my son-in-law, Hank, who married Hannah in one of those, COVID-19 elopement Elvis Presley weddings in Nevada. But anyway, when he and Tabitha said they were going to come with me, and they said, by the way, we'll be okay, right? And I'll never forget this, because immediately the image flashed that you're referring to of June the 2nd, when Black Lives Matter had gathered, and there was a huge phalanx of National Guardsmen and women on the steps of the Capitol. And I'd driven up, and I parked, and I looked at them. I said, what's going on? And someone said, Black Lives Matter is here. And it was a formidable spectacle to see what was up there. And that was the image I had in mind when they said, we'll be okay. I said, yes, we'll be inside. We won't have to go outside. We'll park in the building, and as long as we're inside, we're fine. And how wrong I was. And so that's a story that remains to be told, but it will be told. It will be told.
Remember, when you hear it, that you heard it here first, all right?
Remember, you didn't hear it here first. So
Fair enough. I have two more questions, and I'm going to read a passage which you and I discussed, and then we're going to open it up to some written questions, as many as we can get before we queue up for a signing. And the congressman must leave here at 9 o'clock on the dot. So that's our time frame. So let me see if I can get through a couple questions. So now you're the impeachment manager, Mr. Chairman, and you're facing a precedent. The first impeachment of Donald Trump falls short, 4852, 4753 on the two articles, leaving the House short of 2/3. And in the book, you talk about your assessment, and can you calculate how to get to 67 votes to convict? And you say, don't know if we can get to 67, but maybe we can get to 76. Maybe we can get to 100. Can you share those thoughts?
Well, so my theory was that the Senate is split right down the middle. So there's 50 Democrats and there's 50 Republicans. And incidentally, the first thing you learn when you go over there, and you should know that members of the House are not allowed to set foot in the United States Senate unless we're impeaching somebody. So that's why, some people say that's why we kept impeaching Trump, is so we could all set foot on the floor of the Senate. But the first thing that they tell you when you get over there is there's 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, but the Democrats represent 45 million more people than the Republicans do. Which is an interesting thing. But anyway, but I got over, but what I realized was Senator McConnell was the pivotal player, because I hoped that the Democrats would arrive with an open mind, meaning they would be open to overwhelming evidence of Donald Trump's central involvement in inciting a violent insurrection against the Union. So I thought we would be able to get there with all of them. On the Republican side, a lot of people were saying we wouldn't get any, or maybe what we would get is what happened in the first trial. Mitt Romney maybe would vote with us, or halfway. He voted for one of two counts. I knew that Senator McConnell was not thrilled with Donald Trump. There was no real love lost between them. But for him, it was all a question of political survival. So I thought within the 50 Republicans, if he could get 26, if he could get a majority to agree to vote that way, then he would vote that way. He would vote with the majority. If he could get 25 others, I thought, then it would happen. If 67 was just unlikely, it would be unlikely that we would get 17, because that would be close enough where maybe he'd be able to get the remaining votes. But he wasn't going to vote with us to convict unless he felt that there was a majority to do it. But I really felt, and you can talk to my fellow managers, you to talk to Joe Neguse or Swalwell or Stacy Plaskett, who was my student in law school back in the day. But they were amazed that every day I came in, I said, we're going to get 100 votes. And I really believed it because the evidence was so overwhelming. And I said the only thing that they could vote against us on is what I thought was a completely frivolous argument, devoid of any merit, which is that they didn't have jurisdiction to conduct a trial of a lawfully impeached president if he had already left office. And that silly claim had been made over the centuries and had always been rejected by the Senate. And we dealt with it on the first day of the trial, and we beat it. It was defeated 54-46. So from my perspective, I'm saying that's like a motion to suppress evidence of a gun in a murder trial where you lose the Fourth Amendment motion on the first day of procedural motions, and now you forget about it, and now you go to the evidence of the case, right? But yes, that's with normal American citizens in a real jury, okay? But in the Senate, they all went back to that argument we had already rejected. I mean, that's what's called in a real court of law jury nullification, where the jury's instructed to disregard a point that's already been decided upon. We've already rejected this jurisdictional argument, but they went back to it. And that's why Senator McConnell got up and made that big speech right after the vote, 57-43, which still is, I should say, the most sweeping bipartisan vote for a presidential impeachment in U.S. history. So, everybody else on the team was thrilled that we got 57 votes. But I was crestfallen because I really thought we were going to get 100. But McConnell gets up and he says, Trump was factually and ethically and morally and personally responsible for everything, but we didn't have authority to try him, which is just an extraordinary point to make at that moment. So,
quick question about the hearings. Do you believe that the most recent testimony from the former Chief of Staff, Executive Assistant, has it created a bit of a tipping point in your view?
I would think so. I would hope so. I mean, Cassidy Hutchinson was absolutely integral to their operation. And when she was utterly credible. I assume most of you got to see her. A completely credible witness, no incentive to lie, no motive to lie, and has every sign of telling the truth, unlike somebody like, for example, Rudy Giuliani, But Hutchinson, what was amazing is she said that, she heard Donald Trump say, and this was also utterly believable, incredible, and consistent with everything else we know. Why aren't they letting those people in? Well, they're armed. They've got knives and guns and rifles. They've got mace and bear mace and tear gas. So your Secret Service is not allowing them in. And Trump explodes and he says, let my people in. I want them in there. They're not there to hurt me.
Right.
They're not there to hurt me. He knew the crowd was armed. He had no problem with the crowd being armed. And he wanted to get in the middle of the crowd and lead the march over to the Capitol. It wasn't like they had, rock bands up there waiting to perform for everybody. What did they think was going to happen? He was the one who decided to centralize the protest on January 6th. He said, be there, we'll be wild. Big protest. You can't find another president in the history of the United States who's called a protest against his own government to object to a presidential election he's lost. Never happened. And everybody's distracted by the fact that it was a tweet. Oh, well, it was just a tweet. It was a tweet sent out to tens of millions of people saying, come here to protest against your own government. And they were armed, and he knew it. So is it a tipping point? Yeah, I think it's a tipping point. On the other hand, there are lots of times when we've thought Donald Trump hit a tipping point. So I don't want anybody to go to sleep at this point. We're going to complete the process of getting all the facts out, getting all the evidence out. And then, you know, democracy, making history, as Steve was saying before, it's not about individual people or leaders. It's about all of us. I mean, democracy is the system where the people take care of government together. And we've got to take care of our government, and we've got to take care of our country. We are not a racist country. We are not an anti-Semitic country. We are not a misogynistic country. We are not a country fairly represented by the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani. That's not who we are.
The only words that can top that are the final words of the book. And Jamie and I talked about this, and I'm sure you will understand that he asked me to read this.
Well,
read these.
I don't want to read it.
You don't want to read it.
Yeah.
But you're comfortable with me reading it?
I'm comfortable with your reading it, absolutely.
Okay, and I read this because I think it gives you a real flavor of the soulfulness of this book, of the despair and the darkness and the trauma, but also of the light and the hope. And it may be tough for even me to get through this. The weekend before we lost Tommy, I misplaced my glasses and could not find them anywhere. Tommy helped me look for them in the house and in our front yard, but they were nowhere to be found. We gave up the search, but Tommy comforted me, saying, "I know you'll find them, Dad." We lost Tommy on Wednesday, December 31st. When I woke up on Sunday, January 3rd, I was more miserable than I have ever been, just engulfed in grief, tragedy, and darkness. I went outside to our front porch in the early morning cold to see if there was food in our bird feeder. There was not. I was about to go fill it up when, out of nowhere, a huge flock of birds landed in our front yard. But all different kinds of birds, robins and orioles and blue jays, and the most beautiful cardinals I had ever seen. They came and swooped en masse into our yard. It was just spectacular and breathtaking. I called for Sarah, Jamie's wife, and she ran out to the porch. I'd never seen anything like it before, neither had she. And despite being a man of science and reason, one not easily given to mystical thinking, I was suddenly seized with the thought, flooded with the feeling, and immersed in the overwhelming physical sensation that everything is going to be all right. Tommy is going to take care of us. I moved off the porch and into the yard toward the birds, just to get closer to them, just to say hi for a moment. And as suddenly as they arrived, they took flight as if they were one, flapping away into the unknown sky. For a split second, I was bereft again. But then I looked down at my feet, and there I found my glasses. Jamie Raskin. Okay. Should we take a few? Okay. Thank you. You're comfortable taking a few? Okay, we're going to take a few questions. We have about 10 minutes, and then we're going to go and get settled so that you can get your book signed. Congressman Raskin, I am so thankful for you, your brilliance, your voice of reason. I want you to be president. Will you codify Roe v. Wade?
Hey, the House voted to codify Roe versus Wade back in March, and I think we're going to vote again this week to do it again, just so people remember that we did it. It's stuck over in the Senate with everything else. The voting rights legislation and the gun safety legislation, it's all stuck there because of the filibuster, which I hasten to say is not in the Constitution. It's not in federal law. It's a rule of the Senate, and it's a rule that's riddled with exceptions. There's already more than 100 exceptions to the filibuster for the Trade Adjustment Act, for the Budget Reconciliation Act, for judicial nominations. And so the idea that they won't carve out an exception for voting rights legislation or for women's reproductive freedom or for gun safety is just beyond me. It really is. So, that is something that we need to do. Yeah, on the other part of the question, well,
the part about you being president.
Yeah, that part.
Yeah, okay.
That part. Yeah, I got that.
There's a groundswell in New York 3, by the way.
Well, no, one thing I want to say about that is, and I've taken issue with Speaker Pelosi, who makes this mistake, Liz Cheney, who makes this mistake, AOC made this mistake the other day, when they get up and they say, we have 3 co-equal branches of government. And I know that's some kind of dogma or myth that we teach kids in 3rd grade. First of all, co-equal is not a word, okay? That's number one, okay? That is not a word. It's just equal. The co doesn't add anything. That's like, absolutely unique or something. So we're saying we have 3 equal branches, but really we don't. I mean, we had a revolution against monarchy, kings and queens and czars and emperors and all that. The idea was to create government by the people. The first 3 words of the Constitution, we the people. And who are the representatives of the people? Well, where do you find it? In Article 1 of the Constitution, the first article that lays out all the powers of the Congress to regulate commerce internationally and domestically, to coin money, to fight the pirates, to declare war. You name it, it's all there. Then you get to Article 2, the president, and it's 4 short paragraphs. The 4th paragraph is all about how you impeach a president for high crimes and misdemeanors, for treason and bribery and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Otherwise, the president is the commander-in-chief, not even of the country, not even of the armed forces, but of the Army and the Navy in times of actual war and insurrection. And then what's the main job of the president? To take care that the laws are faithfully executed, to execute the laws of the people. And the Supreme Court, don't even get me started on them. I mean, at best, what they do is they interpret real ambiguities to try to figure out what congressional intent was in a statute, which they long stopped doing it, and then otherwise interpret the Constitution, which obviously they don't do anymore, okay? That's not the business they're in. It's not 3 equal branches. Congress is the representative of the people. So I appreciate the suggestion. I don't dismiss it out of hand. It may or may not be, but the point is that I'm in the place where the power has got to be with the people's representative. So we've got to end the voter suppression, end the gerrymandering of our districts, end the filibuster. The vast majority of the people in this country are on the side of democratic freedom and want to see us pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and want to see us pass the For the People Act, want to see us abolish gerrymandering, want to see us get past this absurd relic of the Electoral College and elect the president by national popular vote. That's where the people are, and we're in a struggle today between the felt needs of the time and where the vast majority of the people are, and a series of anti-democratic political practices that are holding us back like a straitjacket. I'm with John Dewey, who said, the only solution to the ills of democracy is more democracy. That's what we need, more democracy, and undo these fetters that are holding us back.
Brian Land, the president of the congregation, asks your views on the Second Amendment. Can it be, what do you think of repealing the Second Amendment? This is topical for us in New York because, as you know, the court just struck down New York's concealed carry law. Your views on that?
I saw that one, and thank you, Brian Land, for having me. I don't know where you are now, but thank you very much for opening the doors to this beautiful congregation. Look, every time that we introduce a reasonable common sense gun safety measure supported by 90% of the American people, like a universal violent criminal background check to close the internet loophole, to close the private gun show loophole, my extremist colleagues will get up and say, you're talking about repealing the Second Amendment. No, I'm not. I'm talking about reading the Second Amendment, okay? I'm talking about... a well-regulated militia being necessary to the survival of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Even the most conservative interpretation of that, Justice Scalia in Heller versus District of Columbia, even Justice Scalia is saying that cannot be read as the right of people to carry whatever gun they want, whenever they want, wherever they want. Look it up and read it. And he says it cannot be read to nullify background checks, to make sure that, that convicted felons and other dangerous people don't get a hold of guns. It cannot be held to mean that anybody can carry a gun into public buildings like libraries and schools and town halls and school board meetings. So that's Justice Scalia talking. They don't want to deal with that reality. You know who used to believe in this clear understanding of the Second Amendment? The NRA used to believe in it until it got taken over and kidnapped by right-wing politicians who said, let's use the Second Amendment as a way to drive a cultural wedge through the country. And they've done a great job at that, much to the detriment of our country. But we don't need to repeal the Second Amendment. We need to read it. We need to pass reasonable common sense gun safety, and we've got to stop the slaughter in our schools, our churches, our grocery stores, our synagogues all across the country.
To those of you who've gathered with us this evening, live and in person, to those of you who are watching this on a live stream, I could give you no better advice or guidance tonight than to immediately read Unthinkable, Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. Thank you, Jamie Raskin.
Thank you, Steve Israel.
Becky, stay where you are. Well, of course, stand up. But Becky Seamus is going to come and give you instructions on next steps. Should we leave? Okay, come.
If everyone can just take a seat for a couple minutes, we'll let Congressman Raskin and Steve exit the stage, and I'll just give you some quick instructions about the signing. If everyone can just take a seat for a minute.
Thank you very much.
My name is Becky Seamus. I'm general manager of Theodore's Books.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And we just want to say thank you to all of you for coming tonight. A quick thank you to Congregation Lador Vador for hosting us.
Hey, man.
Thank you to Rabbi Moskowitz, to President Brian Land, and also to the Temple Administrator Lee. If you would like to get your book signed, just hold tight another minute. I'm going to give instructions on that. I just want to tell you a little bit about Theodore's Books. We are a new independent bookstore located in Oyster Bay, and we are, part of the event tonight and happy to supply the books. You all have been given a 10% discount. So you can come back into the store and make a purchase. You've also been given flyers that have information about all of our upcoming events. We have a couple of events coming next week. We're also going to be hosting a local author who's here with us tonight, Allison Richmond. She's going to be signing her new book on September 8th with her co-author, Shauna Edwards. So we hope to see you all then. So anyone interested in getting their book signed, you're going to just exit out the sanctuary doors here, and we will instruct you into the social hall and then exit straight out into the parking lot. Thank you so much for coming.